Hello again, everyone. Dr. Noir here. Just to say, as our online festival has been going on, you may notice that authors get rather excited about aspects of their work, about being in lockdown, and sometimes maybe some little swear words pop out there. I think it actually reflects the fact that, we are very relaxed in our conversations, and possibly the lack of a live audience as well. I know no offence has been intended, and I hope none's taken. I hope it's not spoiled in any way your enjoyment of our time together at NN2020 online festival. Thank you.
Welcome to Newcastle Noir 2020 in lockdown. I'm sad that we're not all together in the same room at the City Library, but I hope you enjoy this panel as a flavour of the festival. Please come next year when we'll be doing it all over again with all of these authors and hopefully some new questions if I can think them up. My name is Therese Fairburn. I'm a freelance journalist and former crime fiction reviewer for the Scotsman newspaper in Edinburgh, and I talk a lot about books on Twitter. You might have seen me. So this panel is Murder They Wrote. Here's a little introduction to all these lovely authors, and you're in alphabetical order because that's only fair. Neil Broadfoot was for many years a journalist with local and national newspapers before jumping the fence to work in communications for various public bodies and private companies. His first 3 novels centred on journalist Doug McGregor and cop Susie Drummond. His current Sterling set series featuring close protection expert Conor Fraser opened with No Man's Land, which was longlisted for the 2019 McIlvanney Prize for Scottish Crime Book of the Year. The follow-up, No Place to Die, prompted Ian Rankin to describe him as a true rising star of crime fiction. Cool. Very nice. Noelle Holton is an award-winning blogger under the name Crime Book Junkie. You are bound to have seen her on social media. For 18 years, she worked as a probation officer covering a variety of cases, including serious domestic abuse, which put her string of BA honours degrees plus a master's in criminology to good use. My God, how smart are you? Honestly. She now works as a PR and social media manager for digital publisher Bookouture and has just published Dead Wrong, the second in her series featuring DC Maggie Jameson. Yay! Ed James is the author of multiple series of crime novels set in East London, Edinburgh and Dundee. There's 2 thrillers featuring vampires in the Scottish Highlands, which I really am going to have to read. Okay. And now there are 2 books featuring FBI Special Agent Max Carter, who investigates child abductions in and around Seattle in the USA. Second Max Carter book, Gone in Seconds, is out in early June. He used to work in IT project management, writing during his commute, but now he writes full-time, no commute necessary. How lovely. And last but very much not least, Zoe Sharp has had a variety of jobs, including freelance motoring writer and photojournalist, before publishing the first Charlie Fox novel, Killer Instinct, in 2001. Her ex-reporters turned bodyguard heroine is featured in 13 novels so far. Lee Child once said, if Jack Reacher was a woman, he'd be Charlie Fox. Wishful thinking. Charlie Fox is incredibly cool, and Reacher, frankly, isn't. Well, he's not cool. Many things, but he's not cool. More recently, Zoe has turned her eye to the Lake District and Bones in the River. The second book featuring CSI Grace McCall and DC Nick Weston is out now. So yay. That's our authors. That's their books, or their current books. So, firstly, there's no escaping, sorry for the pun, the current situation. So what have you been reading, watching, generally doing to keep you sane during the lockdown? Are you in fact still sane, or has it driven you completely mad?
Come on, you've known me for too long. You know I've never been sane.
This is very true, but relatively speaking.
I've been lucky because I delivered my next book, which is out in September, just before lockdown started. So I got the edits back during lockdown, and I've just been editing that and working away at that, which is lucky because every time I try and turn my head to writing about this, it just melts my brain as to how you're meant to frame what's happening right now. Because the next book that I write, the next Conor book, will be set next year, and I don't know what next year looks like at the moment, other than the fact that hopefully I'll have better hair by next year.
Possibly less hair.
Zoe, stop laughing at me. Mums are meant to be supportive. So yeah, that's me.
But fair.
What you been up to, Zoe?
Oh, sorry.
Well, I finished off a book. I've got 2 that are on the sort of the drawing board at the moment that I need to get started on. I'm supposed to be trying to renovate a kitchen. This has been slightly hampered by the fact that I tried to amputate the end of one finger a couple of weeks ago. Not doing DIY, that was cooking. Yeah, you can trust me with a power plane, but not with a kitchen knife.
Well, that's good to know. So if there's a stabbing, it's not going to be you.
I actually did a lot of work with knife self-defense stuff, so
Okay.
really, I should be quite good at stabbing people, but unfortunately, I'm also quite good at stabbing myself.
Oh dear. Noelle, how about you? Sorry, I interrupted you there.
No. I work from home anyway, so other than having to travel to London for meetings, nothing much has changed in that front. I've been writing the 4th book, which started before lockdown, so I don't really have to mention anything. The next book I might have to kind of throw something in regarding the situation at the moment. I had a book published, and my 3rd one's just gone up on NetGalley, so yeah.
Exciting stuff.
Yeah, nerve-wracking.
What's the 3rd one called now?
Dead Perfect.
Sensing a theme here. It's really nice.
They're using all the dead titles that Peter James hasn't already nicked.
Well, I have a whole list of them, so I try and make sure. But my publisher chooses them all anyways, the final say. So we might have to change after. Maybe book 4 will be called something else.
Yeah, good idea.
Ed, what's been keeping you busy?
Well, like Noelle, I work from home, so it's like kind of the first sort of 4 or 5 weeks it was just the same, but going shopping was a pain in the hole, and now I'm just so fed up because we should have been at Newcastle Noir, and we should have been going to Lime Crime next weekend, and going to Harrogate and all that sort of stuff. So just missing all the sort of the kind of stuff that keeps me generally sane, or tries to keep me generally sane. That's the sort of hard part. The day-to-day is pretty much the same. So I've just been beavering away, finishing. I've written 2 novellas, edited 2 old books which had to republish because I got the rights back, and a whole novel, and I've driven myself a bit insane doing that novel because that's not good. But that was set during the July 2018 Scottish Open, British Open in Conors, so that's kind of nice to travel back to sort of more sensible times. But the novellas are set in real time, so there's lots of mention of coronavirus and supermarkets running out of toilet paper and stuff. So it's just kind of in the lead up to it. The next one's going to be set in Edinburgh and New York as the lockdowns kick in, so it gives you quite a lot of opportunities there. I think what Neil's saying is how do you deal with this, and everyone's got their own experiences, I think, so you just have to sort of make of it what you will. It'll be quite interesting. I think if you do a sort of generic lockdown thing like Peter May, I don't think it necessarily is going to work very well, because it's just going to be like a 1,000,001 films like Contagion, etc., and so on. So it's all just like the sort of general, the world's knackered story. But if you make it a personal story about lockdown and so on, I think it should work very well, hopefully.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I was going to ask about what you feel about writing about it, as opposed to writing something in the, a novel with the virus in the background, with the lockdown in the background, if you could, or whether you're interested in reading stuff that's really about it and in a different kind of fashion, and it's kind of, very front and center, because I'm not sure I do. I really enjoy the odd random sci-fi dystopian pandemic that's fictional, but reading about a real pandemic that I've lived through, I'm not sure I'd want to do that. What do you guys think?
My take on it is that was that Rankin quote that crime fiction, you're documenting society. So it's like, I do think you need to cover what's happening. I think if you make it about the sort of the whole, like say, the sci-fi Contagion sort of thing, then it's probably going to be fairly dull and fairly hackneyed. But if you take there's lots of opportunities for crazy stuff to be happening in lots of crimes. For example, there's lots of sort of all the sort of the deaths that are happening at home because they haven't been able to go, because people are avoiding going to hospital, and so there's opportunity to hide murders in there, for instance. And cops who are normally detectives are going to suddenly be pushed back into operational roles, so they're going to be walking through parks, making sure people aren't sunbathing too close to each other, or that kind of stuff. So there's lots of opportunities.
Yeah, I was wondering what's in that big cardboard box behind you, Ed, actually.
There's nothing in it anymore. It was shitloads of beer. But it's all in my fridge.
It was.
Yeah, it's all in the fridge. Well, some of it is.
Yeah. Good stockpiling. Good stockpiling.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking about it, discussing this online with somebody recently about during the Troubles in Northern Ireland, there wasn't much published that was about that time. But in 20 years on, or whatever we are now, 25 years on, people are starting to write about it, and we're starting to become interested in reading about it. And the obvious one for me is Adrian McKenzie's Sean Duffy series. And I'm just wondering if we need that period of time. Ed's entirely right that crime fiction has a responsibility to document what's happening, but whether it'll have an influence 10 years down the line, we'll be reading completely different books, at least by some people.
It presents a different set of problems, a different set of parameters for a crime novel. When you're looking at opportunity, for example, as one of the features of a crime, well, when everybody's supposed to be in lockdown, how does that affect what's going on? And it's sod's law that I set my book at Appleby Horse Fair, which has been going on every year. I think they've had a medieval fair there since the 1200s. And the one year they don't hold it, I have a book comes out about Appleby Horse Fair. So I'll have to say this was last year's, But it is interesting looking at what I'm planning to write next. How much do you take into account what's happening now? Because it does date the books as well. Yeah. You have to bear that in mind. I mean, my books are contemporary set, but I've tried very hard not to pin them down to a year, because otherwise the characters age too fast in some ways, because the books tend to take place closer together than the actual year or whatever that they come out. So if you're not careful, the characters are getting old very fast.
Yeah, you might have to, I don't know whether we're going to see a lot of books set in, let's say, January 2020, and then the next one's going to be set in January 2021, and just, a little hint in the background, something like that. It's difficult, isn't it? Because you guys write very contemporary fiction, whereas even 5 years on, it's not strictly a historical perspective, but it's our perspective in, everything's 2020 in hindsight. So all these people writing lockdown novels right now, I'm really interested to see if any of these are going to be published, or whether they're just a great novel that you should have shoved in a drawer and left alone, possibly. I don't know. I think it's a very interesting one to...
But I think the market is going to dictate a lot of it. So I think that I noticed something the other day, I can't remember who wrote it, but it was Jenny Parrott, who used to be one of my editors at Amazon. She published a book, or wrote a book recently. It's sort of a domestic noir set during the lockdown, and that was, I think Orion picked that up, and they look like fast tracking it for release in October. But it'll be sort of seeing how well books like that do. Do people actually want to read about this stuff, or do they want to read fantasy or historic instead? Because it's like that escape thing. I don't know.
I think it's going to be really interesting to see that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I think Ed's absolutely right. The market will dictate it. I mean, it's the old James Oswald thing, isn't it? He tried forever to get published with Crime with a Supernatural Twist, and everybody told him he was mad. He published it himself. He got 250,000 downloads, and suddenly he was the, Crime with a Supernatural Twist. What a genius idea. Why hasn't anybody thought of that before? It just depends on, as Ed said, it depends on what the market dictates. Are people going to be sick of this? Or are they going to want that buffer where they can look back and reflect on what happened through the prism of a book?
I also think as well, publishers tend to want what's selling now. We want more of that. So they're not always looking for the next trend, like vampires in the Highlands.
Yeah, nobody wants that. I've proven that.
I don't know. There are things I would definitely choose to read that above, well, certain other things that are on the shelf right now, shall we say. Anyway, let's get away from the depressing virus and talk about actual books that are available, or very nearly available in some cases. Start at the beginning. Openings. Everybody's got great openings here, and I have had so little concentration. It's been great to pick up 4 novels where I just go right, hooked, turn the pages. Fantastic. So thank you very much. Yeah, so, but again, 4 very different openings. Dead wrong. That question, I mean, the answer is obviously going to be yes, but it's such a provocative way to start it. Awesome. And that whole first chapter is all unease and dread, and you really don't know what's coming, and then you get that massive bombshell at the end of the first chapter. Fantastic. Neil's got what has become known as that first line, and I was rereading it this morning thinking, yeah, okay, this is good. Now, but the one that really got me was Zoe, that opening of Bones in the River. 2 sentences, what, 15 words? That just went straight into my brain and went, wow, where did that image come from? Because it's so simple.
Yeah, that's a good thing. It takes me longer to come up with the openings for books sometimes, because it's not just the opening line or the opening chapter, it's the jumping in point for the story. So in the whole of the story that you have laid out, you will never, or very rarely, start it right at the beginning of when things first began to happen. You have to pick a point somewhere along the timeline that you're going to join the reader into the story. And I liken it a little bit. Years ago, I took part in simulated casualty exercises. And I would be leading a team of people who were there to deal with whatever disaster had just occurred. And you'd be taken to a room and they'd say, right, behind this door, you have heard an explosion, whatever. And they would just open the door and you had to jump in and deal with it. And that's what I like for an opening scene of a book. So it's something that you're straight into the middle of it and you've just got to deal with what happens. And that's the kind of opening I like. So
yeah, I thought it was awesome because it's so plain and simple, but you also know that there's going to be massive consequences going on. But you said you work a lot at getting that opening right. You guys all, obviously you start at the beginning, but do you try and polish that opening so it's exactly right, or do you just put it down and then keep going and come back? And how does it work for you all?
For me, I just, I'm not quite sure how it works. I just start and keep going because I don't plot or plan anything. I just have one idea, that opening, that scene. And because I work in a linear fashion, that's all I've got is that opening line, that opening scene, that opening paragraph, that one idea, and then I just run with it. And I should take this opportunity to say, if I'm making funny hand motions just off camera, my dog has decided to come and put her head on my lap. So this never happens at a normal panel, but I have a 4-legged pal down beside me. So yeah, I never plan or plot, so I just go with it and hope for the best.
I write my opening chapter and the final chapter, and then I fit everything else in between. And the opening chapter, because I end each book kind of introducing the next book, I know exactly where I'm going. And I love hooky starts. I love the start of a book that kind of, a page or two you read, and by the end of it, you're like, oh my God, I need to carry on. I need to keep going. So I like teasing the reader because that's what I like to read.
And I do the complete opposite. I start with usually some sort of theme or the motivation behind the crime, why people are doing things, and then sort of figure out the rationale why something's happened, and then factor in the what, and try and start with a kind of really sort of visceral opening that will lead into the sort of thematic ending. So it's it's not. It's the complete opposite of Neil's stabbing around in the dark malarkey. It's sculptured and designed to be like that, basically, and it's a lot quicker.
Well, I guess it's horses for courses, though, isn't it? It's how it works for you and how it works for the book. Because I remember Val McDermott saying in an interview a while ago, she used to plan in quite a lot of detail, and then she got halfway through a book and it just didn't work. It wasn't going anywhere, and so she stopped planning and just plans a bit now, I guess, but just basically runs at it. So perhaps it's just the book that's in front of you that demands something. I don't know. So we've got openings, great openings, plot, place, and character. 3 strands of crime fiction. You can't have good crime fiction without all of those things being there and being solidly built. So I wanted to ask why you chose your character and why you put them in that place for your current books. And you've set a whole string of books in various parts of the UK. Seattle, bit of a change of scenery. FBI special agent, bit different. What prompted that?
So that's actually with those books. It was where they came about was I looked at what sells a lot in America and Britain, and it was like I went through the top 200 every month on like the first and looked. Here's all the books that are selling, and sort of catalogued them according to various things like the type of crime, locations, blah blah blah. And then the sort of thing that came up was like child abductions in cities. So right, okay, I'll set something in America that's a child abduction. And then when you start looking into child abductions, any proven child abduction in America is automatically a federal crime. So it's not a detective you're looking at, it's an FBI agent. So that kind of led to that. And then it was the actual sort of work around the character came quite late. So I originally wanted the character to be quite sort of empty in a lot of ways, so that he was just like a competent FBI agent with no backstory, and all the personal side of it came from the stories that are on the page. So like the other characters were experiencing the sort of emotional heft and upheaval and so on in their lives, and that he was just there as a sort of hero to do that. But then in the editorial sort of rounds, it was more, can we have a backstory for him that ties it in? So I inserted some of that stuff and threaded subplots through that. And the first 2 books deal with it quite a lot, and the third one will deal with it quite heavily. So yeah, that's kind of the way that one thread works. And Seattle, I think Seattle is a fascinating place. I used to work with someone who lived there, and she worked in Edinburgh for a consultancy when I was at RBS, and I was just like absolutely fascinated by it. And it's kind of one of those cities that's featured enough in America, but not heavily like LA or New York or Washington or whatever. So it gives you sort of a bit of fresh, and it's also like one of the most rapidly growing cities in America, in North America, definitely. So, and when you go there, it's like it's crazy the amount of construction that's going on last year. Certainly, they're just really changing the place, and it's gone from that whole grunge thing to now being the new Silicon Valley.
Excellent. Noel, I was going to say, you set Maggie in a context which you are familiar with.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing a landscape you're familiar with, because it's so, just because of the way you've described it. Did you feel it was a bit right what you know, or was it just you had all this wealth of knowledge that it would have been stupid not to use when you created Maggie?
Probably a little bit of both. Maggie was actually a kind of, she wasn't she wasn't going to be the main character. I wanted to kind of write an ensemble series with a different character for each book. But of course, my publisher kind of said, well, that's not really commercial. So I had to bring her to the forefront. But yeah, I write about Staffordshire. Some of the locations are made up only because I worked in Staffordshire. I worked in a police station, and I managed 2 probation teams. So I didn't want people, picking up the book going, oh, that's me she's talking about, or, so I kind of had a little bit of that separation. But yeah, Maggie's based in a police station, but she works with a whole bunch of different agencies. So that was something I was very familiar with and very interested in kind of bringing out, because you don't read many books. A lot of the police procedurals are pure procedural, and they're looking at the police teams themselves. Whereas I know that, you know, in particular in solving crimes and stuff like that, there are other agencies giving input. And as a senior probation officer at the time, my teams were involved in feeding information to the police when certain crimes were happening. So I just wanted to incorporate that within the series, and I think it's working so far. Fingers crossed.
It's interesting to see all the different agencies work together, because as you say, you might, in a standard police procedural, it's all about the cops, and you might get a little mention somewhere along the line, but it is very different. Neil, Bloody Scotland sparked Conor.
Yeah.
And I know you've talked a lot about how you found your way to Conor because he needed to be somebody who uses firearms, and he has that in his past, and he likes to bend the rules, but he doesn't like to break them so far. And anyway, are you ever going to send him back to Belfast for a book?
That's the plan. I've got, well, plan. I say plan. I have this image of him walking around the Cathedral Quarter and going into the Heart Bar, and that's all I've got. But I know he's going back there, and I know that Simon's going to turn up again, and I know that fun and games are going to ensue, and that's as much as I know. That's it. But I know he's going back because, as I've spoken about before, I spent a lot of time in my misspent youth in Belfast, so I know the place pretty well, and I've always wanted to write about it, which is part of why Conor is the way he is. But I am going to take him back there and space a book in Belfast and see what mischief I can get up to there. If I'm ever allowed to lockdown, of course.
Well, yeah, but you know, I'm sure Noir Island would be very keen to have you there. Zoe, Lake District, bit of a different setting. It doesn't get a lot of airtime anywhere, crime novels anywhere. Nobody, you know, other than the touristy bits, nobody really knows anything about it. Poor old Cumbria. So it's an interesting place to set anything from my point of view. But the other thing that I find that you did amazingly in Bones and River was you gave a voice not just to the people there, but literally to the landscape. There's that scene with the river, and again describing the storm, and I just thought that was so powerful. What made you try and bring in the landscape as a character in itself? Is it
as soon as I got the title for the book, and when I wrote Dancing on the Grave, which was the first one, it was supposed to be a standalone, as these things are, and various people, I think including Noel actually, said this needs to be a series. You know, this is only a suggestion, but let's not forget who's making it, kind of thing. So I'd already decided that I really wanted to write a book, because I lived in Appleby for several years, and I experienced the horse fair from kind of the side of the people who hunker down and, you know, nail planks over the windows and shutter the shops, and it can be a bit like that. I mean, all the local supermarkets had security guards on. The local spa shop would put a table across the front door and serve you. You weren't allowed to go in. So, you know, there was all that. There was some quite extreme reactions to the convergence. But you get about 10,000 travellers and gypsies from all over Europe descend on a very small market town. And you get another 30,000 visitors who come to see the spectacle. So it is a remarkable influx of strangers arriving in this town. And I was told very early on by other people who live there, it's considered locally a great time to settle old scores. Because you get your own back on the neighbours who've really annoyed you all year, but you blame the gypsies. And that started the idea going for that book. But as soon as I got the title for it, and I knew it needed to be something of the, in the, at the, something. And Bones in the River came from a Gillian Welch song. And when I heard the song, I realised that the river, because it flows all the way down the Eden Valley and then it goes through the middle of Appleby and they wash the gypsy horses in the river, that it was going to need to play a very pivotal role in the story. It was going to be the backbone of the story. And in that case, why not give it its own voice? I mean, usually I have my two sort of main characters who are a very low rank detective, because I wanted somebody who's at grassroots level, and a CSI. And then I usually, in the last book, I went inside the heads of people who were directly involved with the crimes. So for this one, I went inside the heads of somebody who makes a split-second mistake and then has to try and live with it. And also one of the Romany characters, and that was really quite difficult. It's more difficult writing cross-culture, I think, than it is cross-gender. Well, I find it so, but then I'm into cars and motorbikes and you know, so anyway. So yeah, it was fascinating to do that. And of course I did sneak in this amazing forensic pathologist character called Dr. Io Onatade, who made a millionaire.
I spotted that one. Very flattering though. She's a complete badass in the book.
Oh yeah. But then she is in real life, so no change there.
Very true. Thinking about the traveler perspective, did you have to do a lot of research? Because I don't know anything about it, but it comes over as being very well balanced and very sensitive to what most of us don't understand, but is important in terms of culture, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I tried not to either romanticize or demonize them, which was a very fine path to tread. I mean, there are good and bad characters on both sides, so I tried to show that fairly even-handedly. And in fact, I was put in touch, a writer friend of mine, Judith O'Reilly, put me in touch with a friend of hers who had another friend who was from a traveller background. And she read the book for me in sort of, you know, in rough draft form, and didn't come back with any, in fact, bits of it that I'd actually made up. She said, oh yeah, my family do that. And I thought, oh, well, I've obviously absorbed enough of it. But I found out afterwards, apparently, the main Romany character, Queenie, was very, very close, I mean, completely by accident, to her grandmother, who had been a Romany and brought up 7 children single-handed, and she really saw her grandmother in the character of Queenie. So that was
great
really
stuff. That's, yeah, that proves you've got it all right then, doesn't it? When you're creating a new protagonist, so possibly not Charlie, but you know, first book in a series, standalone, but whatever, what's the process of it for you? Do you keep do you have a backstory for them in your head, even though it's not necessarily going to be on the page, or do you just like to see what they come up with as you go?
Well, I tried out the character of Grace in a short story a few years ago, a story called Tell Me. And that one actually ended up being made into a short film. So something about the character really appealed to me. I wanted somebody who was somewhat calmer than Charlie and less likely to shoot you. So, and I quite like Grace, and I like the sort of the interaction between her and Nick, who's the detective, because they're both outsiders in a lot of ways. And I've got some of the backstory because you need it, but for most characters, I don't write character biographies before I start. I don't meet them till they walk onto the page and more or less get in your face. And that's sometimes the best way to allow it to happen, because people don't behave as you're expecting them to.
Yeah, it's when they start going off and doing their own thing that they really come to life, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, everything I know, I learned from the people I keep in the basement, so.
Yeah, enough said. Ed, how about you? I mean, you've created however many series, I can't even count. Every time.
I can't even count. I've had this chat with people like Mark Edwards and Kelly Taylor who do sort of standalones, and it's kind of the same thing. So every new series is like doing a standalone, but the problem is that you've got to build in all the ancillary characters like sidekicks and bosses and Sokos and pathologists and blah 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 blah. So you're kind of having to create this whole world and then making sure each character is different. So one of the series I did ages ago, my agents read it and said, well, this is just basically Cullen with a kid, so it's not like I haven't really defined them well enough. So that that took a lot more effort. But yeah, it's like you're just trying to sort of explore interesting people, and I think a lot of readers do tend to think that you are your character. Like I think they probably think Ian Rankin is John Rebus, or vice versa. And I'm nothing like many of my characters. Maybe Fenchurch is the closest because he's a right grumpy shite, but most of them I'm so different from. You know, being a cop, like, you know, they're really aggressive people, and they're sitting in interview rooms with people and trying to intimidate the hell out of them. Whereas when I had to work for a living, my style was very much more getting people on side and so on. I mean, I could like erupt and explode and so on from time to time, but it was very much a collaborative sort of approach. But going to that sort of police thing where you're having to sort of goad someone into making a mistake, that's really interesting psychology to get your head around.
Now, I know, Neil, you started with parameters for Connor that you needed, but after that, we've got quite a lot of his past coming out in the first two books. I'm hoping this continues. I'm kind of interested to see what makes him tick.
Well, it will, because I'm getting to know, because Connor was a creation of invention. Like Zoe said, I got to meet him when he first walked onto the page. So yeah, as we go, there are more things that I will learn about and that I will then explore and kind of dive in. I mean, the next book that's out in September takes quite a deep dive into his family history, and all the stuff about his gran, etc. And I didn't know I was going to do that until I started writing it. Again, it was one of those ones where I had a rough idea, I ran with it, and about four chapters in, it was right, you're going to get into this right now. And that's all I knew. So that'll continue. There's other things that I want to explore. So yeah, there will be more of Conor. When he goes back to Belfast, that'll dig into his past and his future as well.
Excellent. I look forward to that. He's interesting. He's infuriating, but he's interesting. I just wish he'd talk more. But, you know, you can say that about a lot of guys, to be fair. Noelle, you have created Maggie as a cop rather than create her as your job as a probation officer. Was that a very deliberate thing to move it slightly away from not so much the things that you're familiar with, but something that the readers would be more familiar with and make her an entry point?
Yeah, I basically had no choice, really, because I mean the first book, Dead Inside, was Lucy's story, and Lucy is a probation officer, so there's a lot of probation stuff in Dead Inside. But I wanted to, and I, you know, Maggie was obviously in it, but I wanted to make Dead Wrong more of a Maggie story so that the reader can get to know her a little better as the series progresses. And I sat across from a sergeant for 7 years. He was directly across from me. So there was a lot of cop talk, and, you know, we talked a lot in acronyms back and forth. So I kind of became familiar with this, the sort of stuff that police did. And I've always read police procedurals. So I loved having that ability to jump into someone else's skin, because for probation, I know everything about it, but I feared I'd probably get a little boring. I'm not sure how interesting it would be to have, you know, a probation officer interviewing offenders and pissing them off and being threatened for a whole series. I probably would have got maybe 2 books out of that before someone said, okay, this is boring. But that's the life of a probation officer, sadly. So yeah, and with Maggie herself, I'm still learning stuff about her as I write, you know, and a lot of the characters, when I was writing about them. You know, in my head, I'd have one idea of, you know, this person's going to start doing this, but they totally veered off and did something completely unexpected. And, you know, even for Dead Inside, for instance, there was a character who was only supposed to play a very small part in the book, but managed to take over a vast majority of it. So I think it's one of those things where you just got to go with, you know, how it comes out, what's in your head and where the story takes you.
Yeah, peripheral characters have a habit of rewriting their part when you're not looking.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You've always got to watch for the little quiet people in the background. They're very dangerous. Sorry, I dropped a piece of paper there. Got a bit lost off. A quick one. 2 pieces of advice. There's going to be people watching this when it eventually goes online. It's a bit weird. Who want to try out writing, want to be a writer, they are writing. What would you say to them other than sit in the chair and write? And what would you also say to them? You've all got very varied experiences of publishing, traditional deals, indie deals, self-publishing, ebooks, all the rest of it. What's a useful thing that you wish you'd known when you started out about publishing?
God, how have I forgot? The biggest piece of advice really is get on with it. There's lots of people who are writing a novel and you go, oh really, neither am I. So there is a case of that. Even if you don't plan beforehand, even if you don't plot, if you take an idea and run with it like Neil, I would say keep a summary as you go along writing the book, because it's not what's going to happen, it's what already has happened, and therefore when you come to do your edits, it makes life so much easier. And also have an idea of the nugget of what the book's about. Write your own jacket copy, even if it's not the end one that goes on the book, before you start writing, because that will tell you where the story starts.
I like that. Yeah. I'm very much not writing a novel. Lots of people have asked me that in the past year since I stopped working full time, and I was just like, no, it's too much like hard work for me. Noelle, how about you? Since you're a little newer to it.
Yeah, I'm the newbie of the group. For me, I think what advice-wise, I would say read a lot of books about the genre you're interested in writing. I've been reading crime fiction for 30 plus years, and I, you know, I think you learn a lot about the different styles of writing. And I think for me, I found exactly what I wanted to write by reading a lot of the books that I enjoy reading. So I would say probably that's one of the important things. And another thing, asking for advice is great. I asked loads of people and I got loads of different pieces of advice. Find what works for you, because, you know, someone can tell you, for instance, oh, plot it out. Plotting doesn't work for me, but every now and again, I'll write a few chapters ahead. I'll have an idea of a few chapters ahead. People say write chronologically. I don't. I write whatever's in my head. So, but that's what works for me. So take the advice by all means and listen to what people say and test it out. See what works for you. That's my bits.
Yeah, I like it. Guys, how about you?
Definitely, you got to find what works for you, and it's also like writing novels is not for everyone because it is psychologically tough, and it's not just about the writing, which is can be pretty hard. It's all the rest of it. So you will get your teeth kicked out every so often, and you got to sort of have that mental fortitude to just pick yourself up and dust yourself off and get on with it. So there's a lot of persistence involved. But like Noelle says, look at all the advice, and there's, you know, copious interviews out there. See what works for other people, and, you know, try stuff out. I always try to do something new with each book to just keep myself interested as much as anything, and just try to get new slants on stuff and learn new tricks and stuff to keep that fresh. But for someone starting out, I think, like Zoe's saying about keeping a note of, if you're making up as you go along, which I think most people do when they start out, keep a note of what you're doing, and don't be afraid to sort of get advice on certain things. But also, I think for new writers, the most important thing, I think, is to get stuff edited professionally, not by relatives or friends, because they're there for you to be your cheerleaders, and what you need is actual constructive criticism. So there's people who can be aggressive arseholes, and you don't want that, but it's someone who is going to be there to say, like, okay, you've got this idea is really good, you need to do more of this, less of that, more of that, less of that. So that they're there to help you understand the craft of writing, because there's nothing more important as a writer than understanding how you're going to do it and how you're going to do it again. Because there's a lot of people who've written one hit book and never been able to follow it up, and you don't want to be that person unless you're getting paid 10 million quid for that book, which is incredibly unlikely. So be able to repeat it, work out what your process is incredibly important.
Yeah, I like your comment about getting advice from people who are not going to be mean about it, but who are going to be, constructively critical. I spent 20 years as a newspaper sub-editor. Editing is what I do. I can't create the thing in the first place, but I can help you make it better. And I think a lot of new writers don't understand that getting to the end of the first draft is just the very beginning of it, isn't it? I mean, Neil, I've looked at chapters for you, because you know more or less what I'm going to say. You know that the thing is wrong, but you don't necessarily want to point it out yourself.
Yeah,
sometimes.
I think that's it. It's everybody talks about the people who are writing a book. Oh, I'm writing a book as well. The one thing that I say is this is a job that doesn't feel like work, and that's a trite little cliche, but it's true. That yes, it's great fun writing, but it is a job, and you need to treat it as a job. You need to A, finish the book, B, take all the critical advice that's aboard, have the guts to be able to, once you've got a draft and you've got somewhere that you're happy with it, give it to somebody who isn't your partner, your wife, your husband, your mum's best friend, or whoever it is. Give it to somebody who is, as Ed said, going to kick your teeth in if it's crap, because that's the only way you're going to learn. And it's getting out of your own way to an extent of, yes, okay, I've done this, that's not the end of the process, what's the next part of it? So it is taking the ego out of it. And I suppose, having worked with you as an editor as well, I've been lucky that my ego got kicked out of me fairly quickly. Newspapers by a succession of editors who may or may not have personality disorders. So that's helped. But yeah, I think getting out your own way is one of the most important things you can do.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, everybody needs to go and take all of that advice. Whatever you're writing. Yeah, one last question, because we are running out of time. We could just sit here and chat all day. It'd be awesome. Okay, so our panel is titled Murder They Wrote. Everybody's got different writing habits, different ways of publishing, different plots, different ways of creating conflict, all of the rest of it. One thing in common, there are dead bodies all over these books. And in crime fiction generally, there are dead bodies everywhere. Does crime fiction need murders? Does it need dead bodies, whether they're on the page or murdered off stage or whatever? Or is it just that we've got so used to it that we think this is it?
Well, so can I just jump in first, because the two Max Carter books are about child abduction instead of murder, so they're very different. And also the first Dundee one I did was about it was similar abduction sort of thing, so it was like a more domestic terrorism thing, but animal cruelty, revenge against that. And what's interesting about those is they're more sort of, they become more sort of thriller things. So there's a ticking clock thing going on, so it's a race against time. Whereas when it's a dead body in chapter 1, you've got a grizzled old detective in a classical car wandering around talking to people to find out what happened, and getting, but you get quite a lot for free when you do when you have a murder, because people are automatically intrigued, because like you've got so many questions, and so, as long as the crime has that sort of level of like why, who, what could possibly be going on here, and also a sort of a level of twist to it, so that it's not the immediately obvious thing, then I think, you know, that you don't need to have that dead body. But as long as you have that sort of like the Lee Child thing of asking a question and then deferring the answer, that's basically what you should be doing. Sorry, I've answered the question for everyone seemingly.
I like reading about murders, so that's why I write about them. I've been a big true crime fan since I think I started reading true crime at about 11. So murder is just something I'm fascinated by, and killers themselves I'm fascinated by. And obviously my background in probation and stuff, I came across a few. So I just like writing about it and reading about it. I don't think there's other books that I enjoy, but they kind of are more mystery or psychological, so they'll get in your mind. But nothing for me excites me more than a good kill.
At this point, I'm quite pleased we're not sitting in the same room.
I think with what Ed said about his FBI child abduction books is the difference really between a thriller and a, you know, a crime stroke mystery, or should that be slash mystery, is that in a thriller really it's a race against the clock to stop something terrible happening usually. You know, there is some Armageddon about to unfold if you don't get there in time. Like the child has been abducted, and if you don't find them, they will die, or something worse than that. But in a mystery, it's trying to return everybody to the way things were before the body was discovered. So it's trying to put things back to, you know, to normality. I mean, I'm interested in the how and the why from the point of view as much of the perpetrator as I am from the detective, and it's the effects that the crimes have on the people involved that interests me. But I think in a lot of ways in crime, you do need a body because it is the ultimate crime. I mean, it's theft of somebody's life is the ultimate crime.
Yeah. It's interesting for me. All my books have had dead bodies in them. Some with higher body counts than others, just by the nature of the beast. But I do have a standalone that I'm going to write that I had to plan out, which was the most excruciating experience of my life. And it doesn't have any murders in it, but it is that race against time of somebody's been abducted, something's going to happen, how do you get out of this? But there's no murders in that, and it might be quite an interesting thing to write that, to actually write the book without killing anybody in it.
Yeah, there's also the serial killer thing where you've got both of those elements. You've got there's a murder, and then there's also the threat there's going to be more, and there is going to be more. So you have bodies stacking up in a rural location in Britain, probably. It's completely implausible, but people love that stuff. And it's, you know, from a sort of, you know, narrative drive point of view, you know, having both those things is, you know, that's like why it's gold dust, I think. Because you've got all the sort of police procedural elements of banter and mystery, and you've also got the thriller elements as well, which is why they do so well.
Well, I don't think it's any surprise really that in lockdown Britain, there's not only been, you know, this terrible thing of all these families closeted together, but a rise in digging the garden. You work with that.
Yeah. They're not just all growing cats either, are they? Let's face it. So murders are great, obviously. Is there anything that you wouldn't use as a plot, a device, or is it just about how you handle it?
How you handle it.
Yeah, I think it is. Agreed.
Yeah, I don't particularly want to write about child sex offenses or anything like that. I worked too many cases and they were horrific and they're still in my mind. So I think that's probably a topic I'd avoid, even if it was only mentioned off the page. Because
besides saying I was researching a book is no defense, apparently.
Only if you click open. Only if you click open the links. My dissertation was on child sex offenders, so.
Yeah. No,
I've learned a lot.
Yeah, no, I've done books about sort of child sex gangs and stuff, and it's a horrible world to write about. And I think, you know, it says the books tend to be quite grimdark. And one of the ideas I had was like doing a book about female genital mutilation, and a white man writing about that is not a good thing. So it's not something I should write about. I think there's a huge argument about cultural appropriation and so on. And I think there's definitely stuff that some people should have the voice to write about and other people don't. And it's like finding that sweet spot where you're okay to write about it, but there's certain topics I don't think certain people should write about.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Get a bit sick of seeing, there's a great Twitter, and I've forgotten what it's called, but there's a great Twitter account that just subverts all the terrible things that male writers say about women, turns them around into being things said about men, and it's just so ridiculous, ridiculous. And if you ever want real entertainment for comic books, the Hawkeye initiative is what you should be looking at. Terrible comic book poses for women in lycra turned into terrible comic book poses for men. It's hysterical.
Yes,
And it just shows it.
Some of those with guys draped over motorbikes in the same pose with the slingbacks on as well.
Don't want to see.
Oh dear. Nasty. Right, one quick fire question to finish up. What are you reading right now? What are you reading next? Just in case anybody out there needs even more things to read.
I'm reading this, Mike Craven's The Curator. Just started it. Really, really good. And I also just got sent a book I'm not even allowed to talk about on social media, but I will tell you that it's by Rob Parker, and that's all I can probably say about it. But yes, very excited. So those lined up my next two reads.
Sweet.
I just got sent Michael Connelly's latest, so I'll be dipping into that. And then after that, I've got no idea what I'm going to read after that. I will see. I'm just taking it one book at a time at the moment because my reading concentration during the lockdown is completely knackered. I'm finding it difficult to concentrate on books at the moment.
My concentration for reading has been absolutely terrible, and I've just been sort of reading enough to send myself to sleep. So reading books about the evolution of football tactics over the ages and stuff is great. You get a couple of pages and then it's like when Mourinho played a 4-2-3-1 at Real is... but I've just started reading Susie Holliday's next book, The Last Resort. So that's excellent.
So I'm very envious about that. That's going to be great.
It's really good.
Well, I've been reading so many non-fiction books to finish off the book that I've been writing, that I'm sort of having a little bit of a break before I dive into the next book. So there is not a great deal on my open on my nightstand at the moment, I must admit.
I have envy of that. I had been chipping away quite beautifully at the quite ridiculous pile of books to be read in my bedroom. I thought, fantastic, look, there's a space. And then I probably bought 6 books and filled it up again.
Yeah.
So yeah, try not to buy anything. The good thing about no book festivals is I have not spent any money on books. But the bad thing about well, I haven't spent a lot of money. You know, I would normally come back from a festival with 6 books. So this is quite good in comparison. But anyway, everybody should be going out and buying and reading your books because they are all highly recommended. And this is about all we've got time for. So I'm just going to wrap it up by saying thank you to all the authors for agreeing to chat. Neil Broadfoot, Noel Holton, Ed James, and Zoe Sharp. Do buy their books, everybody. Do also find them on social media, and you can ask any questions that you have of them there, and they may or may not answer depending on how crazy you feel. Thank you also to Jackie Collins and the team for making the magic of Newcastle Noir appear online. We're all desperately sad that it wasn't happening for real, but a little bit of online chat has been really good to fill the gap. So thank you very much. And that's us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.